older, jealous, childless women are doing absolutely everything they can to destroy the fertility of young women. Now, why wouldn't you want to spend your young years with the person that you want to be with?
I mean, I think there's no problem in setting out those honest truths, which are your life will be happier if you have a partner and children. I just think that's just true. And people should be told that, and then they should be told the realities of fertility.
There's been a lot of viral debate in recent conversation in regards to the male loneliness epidemic. Well, Jordan Peterson and Megyn Kelly sat down to discuss the female loneliness epidemic. Let's get active.
Can I ask you a little bit about the way that you constructed your own family and career pathway? Because I've been working with my wife trying to sketch out, she does a podcast on issues related to femininity. And we've been trying to sketch out, at least hypothetically, something like a appropriate timeline for young women, because they have no real guidance in that. So here's a stat for you. We hit this milestone last year. Half of Western women, 30 and under, have no child. So it's a little more than half now. So we hit more than half. Half of them will never have a child. And 90% of them will regret it. That means we're setting up, this is a catastrophe. This is a catastrophe if it's true, and the data are pretty clear, I believe. This means we're setting up 1 woman in 4 for
loneliness,
isolation. Right, and that gets increasingly brutal as you get older. And I also think we're setting up that 25% of women to be preyed upon in a manner like nothing we've ever seen when they enter their later years, because they'll have no one to keep an eye out for them, especially during times of vulnerability. This is not going to be good. So let me sketch out an idea for you in terms of a timeline and tell me what you think about that. I mean, 1 couple in 3 have fertility problems by the age of 30. And that's defined as not being able to conceive within a year of trying.
Right.
And so it seems pretty obvious. All assistive reproductive technology notwithstanding, which is very expensive and very unreliable and certainly not something to be depended on except in cases of absolute necessity. Having your children before you're 30 is a wise move if you want to ensure that it's going to happen. And so then the question is order. You know, we're best served probably as human beings to have our children in our 20s and probably our early 20s. And of course, that's going to be more demanding for women, more demanding and more of an opportunity, I would say, because each child really requires something approximating 3 years of pretty dedicated care. You know, the data seem to show that if your child is 3 and reasonably social, then social education, daycare, can work. Before that, especially with transformation of caregivers, it doesn't look like it's a very good idea. So you need 3 years per child. And maybe you want 2 children or 3 children. And so that's something like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years that you have to devote to it. Now, women live about 6 or 7 years longer than men. So that's kind of an interesting little twist on the whole situation. And if you started your career at 30, you could have 40 years of career, which is a lot. And that way, I would say, in some ways, you get to have your cake and eat it too, although perhaps not at the same time, you know, which we had talked about early. But there are
not at the same time, because, you know, that goes against the feminist prescription that you can essentially have your cake and eat it too. So although Jordan Peterson was saying that these numbers were catastrophic, I wanted to fact check him just to ensure that he is being accurate. Now, I found this data on Statista.com, and this demonstrates the percentage of childless women in the United States in 2022 by age. I think what's interesting to note within this is that the biggest drops are between the ages of 20 to 24 years old and 25 to 29 years old. It's like a 22% drop, which represents the same percentage drop from 25 to 29 years old to 30 to 34 years old. 22%. Then after that, you see the rates begin to slow right at the age of geriatric pregnancy, and then continues on a snail's pace after that. Now, I wanted to compare these numbers to a random year in the past, and according to the CDC, 15% of women were childless at age 30 in 1970. 15% versus 38%. Matter of fact, that's probably not even that accurate, because that's just from 30 to 34 years old. It's probably more accurate to the 60% number. And this is leading to rapid population decline. Just like Jordan Peterson said, this is in fact a catastrophe. But what do we think was going to happen when we continue to push getting women into the workplace in lieu of establishing a family unit, teaching them suddenly to dislike men while also giving men their bodies more often through this sexual liberation without having fair discussions in regards to the psychological damage that they are inflicting on themselves? It's absurd.
Real guidelines developmentally for young women, and they don't know what to do, and they're increasingly not married, and they increasingly don't have children, and they're increasingly unhappy. And it doesn't look to me like slave to a corporation is necessarily a substitute for family life and children. Now, some people have a career, you have a career, some people have a career, most people have jobs. So anyways, I'm not saying that that's a hard and fast rule, but I don't really see any way around it. And here's another little twist that is worth adding. I think most people who are popular and attractive get 5 chances to establish a permanent relationship, and that's about it.
That's fascinating.
Right?
That's
well, you know,
figure
it's a year to kind of get to know someone.
Yeah.
And then assume that, you know, you're fortunate enough so that people are lining up, which is not that likely, and probably not the position that most people are in.
Right.
And so maybe it's 2 years, including the failure, and 5 is a 10-year span. You know, I mean, I'm not trying to be overwhelmingly pessimistic, but I wouldn't say it gets easier as you get older. You get more different from other people.
More set
it
in your
isn't
ways,
easier to establish
baggage.
a relationship when you're older, I wouldn't say.
No.
And more
Plus,
people are snatched up.
Less options.
well, there's that. That's a big problem. You know, who's left? And the other issue I would say, too, that's germane is, why wouldn't you want to spend your young years with the person that you want to be with? You know, you're going to, forestall that for what reason? You know, I got married to Tammy when I was 27, I think, and one of our regrets is that we didn't do that earlier. Now, there were reasons for that, and maybe they were valid, probably they weren't, but I'm not happy that that time was missed. It would have been better to have spent it together. So I'd like your thoughts on that. I mean, the timeline, just that general layout.
I mean, I think there's no problem in setting out those honest truths, which are your life will be happier if you have a partner and children. I just think that's just true. And people should be told that. And then they should be told the realities of fertility, because those are realities that, you know, can be potentially meddled with, but there's no guarantee.
Yeah,
and
you're on the shot clock.
If you're one of the people who cannot meddle with it and you missed your window, it will be a lifelong regret that will be unsolvable and will be like a deep source of pain, an ongoing deep source of pain. So it's not something that you could easily brush off. And so all those truths need to be shared while at the same time prizing and sharing the fullness of the rewards of motherhood with young women, which isn't done. That's the other piece of it. Like if you listen to Jordan, if you listen to Ben, if you listen to, you know, the Daily Wire, you'll hear that. You won't hear motherhood, early motherhood, or any kind of motherhood generally bashed. You'll hear it praised. But in society still, in the movies, on the television shows that women watch, it's not. You're still like, you still hear she's just a stay-at-home mom, you know, or she doesn't work. They still don't look at, you know, motherhood as something that's, valuable. You know, something valuable, like work as though it's a bad word. Motherhood is work too. It's great work. It's life-fulfilling work. But it still has this like, And women who I know all over New York, and now I'm in Connecticut, they say things like, it's very important to me that my daughter see me going to a business meeting. Like, mommy's got a business meeting, or going to the office if they have just like some small meeting. And I'm like, why? Why? Because they don't think the daughter will think that they're important if they don't have some sort of business pressing on them.
Sounds like
which is absurd
speaking.
and hashtag part of the problem, right? Like, no, we all need to be teaching young girls and boys that motherhood is enough. Like, being a mother is a completely valid, beautiful, awesome, really important choice. I actually went to my daughter's school and I said, I think it's fine you have career night. It's an all-girls school. And you bring in doctors and lawyers and journalists and whomever. You need to bring in a stay-at-home mom. You need to have somebody stand up there and tell the girls, I made a totally different choice. And so much the better if she's got a great education. And she can say, yeah, I have all the same skills you have. And I was on the exact same path as you were. And I loved learning and being introduced to the classics and being able to sit around a dinner table with so-called intellectuals and know the references. And I chose a totally different path when I graduated from those schools, because there was one thing that was most important to me. And let me tell you how that's rewarded me. The school did not do it. Okay. So, we've got a counter program at home. So having said all that, I'll tell you my own personal experience, which doesn't really reflect that way of thinking or this recommended course at all.
Yeah.
And yet still, I'm very, very...
Before she goes in, I wanted to comment on that. I think she brings up such a good point that made me think about, the imaging of the purpose within our life, right? The roles that we take. Which fork in the road are you going to take in order to forge a specific path to get somewhere? And oftentimes I think far too many of us, and this goes for both men and women, we look at like the sexiness of a role. What is it that I mean by that? There's something interesting happening when you say to somebody, that I do this for a job. And dependent upon the sexiness of that title, irrespective of how much actual money that you are making, more people feel a sense of value and tied to the sexiness of a title. And that goes back into the imaging or the branding of that title. I remember when I got into business school and, I had an idea of what I wanted to do, right? But I had options. And one of those options, as it was presented to me, was being a brand manager within CPG companies, consumer product good companies. And as I began to learn a lot about it and meet the people within these roles, although I liked it, what I found is that the image of the role, as crafted by those same brand managers, made it a lot more sexier. But, the starting salaries were no different, if not less, than being a consultant, or if I wanted to go into investment banking. But there was a lot of fanfare around this brand manager position. And I had to come to realize is that the brand managers are just so good at creating image that image was way more appealing to me. But it's actually something that was not that high on what I wanted to do. And I think that the same thing is happening in modern times today when it was referred to motherhood. You get bad actors that make it seem like it is less important than what it actually is. So then you get a cohort of women that follow the sexiness of being in corporate America or being a doctor or being a lawyer. Meanwhile, it is damn near impossible to find a female partner at a law firm that is truly happy. And oftentimes you see these women burn out because they've gotten over the sexiness of the role, and it's a lot of money too, in lieu of what is going to actually drive them purpose-driven within their life, which is having a family.
I really am very happy with my life. I'm contented. I have a very, very strong marriage and extremely intact, loving, present, and meaningful relationships with my 3 kids. But I also have a very large career that's been hugely successful. Not to be self-aggrandizing, I'm just saying, like, on the scales of careers, mine has worked out very well. So in no way did I really sacrifice much in that lane. And I realize this puts me in the 0.00001% of people, and probably even fewer percent of women. So the way that I did it was not that unconventional for when I grew up. I was definitely part of a generation that felt you work. You get to work. You graduate from college, go to college, but when you finish college, you work. That's the thing you do. But in my case, Jordan, from that day to this, I've always loved working. I love it. It's totally exciting and interesting and intellectually stimulating to me. And I cannot imagine not doing this. It's been really important to me. And if I looked at the 21 or 22-year-old version of me versus me now, or let's say when I had my kids, which was later, 38, 40, and 42, I guarantee you, I personally, this isn't true of everybody, but I personally would not have been anywhere near as good a mother. I was much more selfish and less capable of giving. And, I was more of a taker, like most young people are. Not all, but most. And so I really think that the calm I've brought to motherhood, the life lessons, the wisdom, has been a boon to my children who are calm and cool and not panickers and have a wisdom about them that I think you kind of get through osmosis and maybe some genetics. But they're in a very good place, I think, in part thanks to the fact that it's not age related for everybody, but for me, I didn't reach that place in my life until I was older. And unfortunately, it wasn't planned this way because I didn't meet my husband until we were 35. But unfortunately, and believe me, I think about it all the time, it means that my children and I have a shorter runway together. And I hate that fact. It haunts me.
See, the thing is that this is like, is it the chicken or the egg that came first, right? Did you love working because you were nurtured into loving working, right? And you came from a family where that's what you saw? Or if you came from a different family that did not sacrifice working time on someone else's dollar versus spending it forging relationships with your children, and you saw that in your family, would that be something that would make you more purpose or value driven? I wish there was a way to survey those same young women that we talked about earlier back into the 1970s, if they would have the same degree of selfishness as what she describes within herself at those young years, or was she forced into selfishness so that she could build a career? I find this conversation fascinating because Jordan is laying the runway out and asking someone else who is driving down that runway, what do you think about your past decisions? Trading essentially legacy, or at least a component of your legacy, for lifestyle.
I'm so grateful that I have them at all, unlike so many women who weren't this fortunate. But I hate the fact that every time we talk about their lives, I'm calculating, it's his age plus 42. That's what I'll be. When my youngest has his children. And boy,
Wow,
my kids
she had
better
like
have
40.
kids young if they want me to be part of that child's life at all. If they want, if I get to be a grandparent. And it's its own special form of pain, Like, would I have traded my career building and doing the things that I love? Because I was a lawyer for the first 10 years and then I switched to journalism. I don't know if I can say that. I didn't meet the right man until I was 35. If Doug had come into my life at 22 and I rejected him, and then we went and married different people and refound each other at 35, that would be really painful. But I don't have that regret. We didn't meet until the time I think God brought us together. And for me, that was the time. That's when I was ready. I was ready to not downshift in my career exactly, but to make compromises in my career that I hadn't been prior to that. And I was fully committed to devoting myself to motherhood in a way I never had been before. And some of it was born of the intense love that I had for my husband and still have, in which my kids were born into, this swath of like truly mad romantic love that they're products of and are immersed in every day, which is probably the best medicine for them. So I have no regrets about how I did it, but I also
You got to acknowledge
it's not all roses and unicorns. There are downsides to doing it the way I did.
she's really smart. I like her.
Yeah, well, our culture is so youth obsessed, and I suppose that came out of consumer culture in the 1960s when, for the first time in human history, young people had excess money to spend and could be, marketed at. We tend to construe, especially in popular culture, life as if you're old by the time you're 30.
Right.
And
Jordan, when I broke into journalism, I was 32, and I thought, I'll never be accepted in this business. I'm too old. I will have no future in this industry. It was like so silly.
That turned out to be wrong. Yeah.
Now we're going to skip ahead a little bit and get into a section being coined as the evil queen phenomena. Watch how Jordan breaks this down. It's just, let's go.
There's another perversity in this that I really have a hard time figuring out. because I would say that by and large, the feminist movement that's at the bottom of some of the things we're talking about has been a left-wing movement. And I do not understand for the life of me how in the world it can be logically coherent that the left can be anti-capitalist, anti-corporate, and pro-career. Like, I just can't. Yeah, so there's that. So we could talk about that it's like, okay, corporations are evil.
Modern day contradiction.
And there isn't any higher purpose you can serve as a woman than to serve one.
Right.
It's like, okay, I'm not exactly sure what to make of that.
Now what?
Then I want to tell you a weird little story too. I was looking at the Brothers Grimm Snow White version recently because I went and saw the Disney Snow White version, which, was exactly the sort of mistake that you'd think it would be, both to attend and to produce. And
they woked it out.
I want to just tell you a snippet of that story.
Okay.
So Snow White is young and beautiful, and the evil queen wants that, right? So she's an older woman who is competing with the younger woman for the younger woman's advantages. That's the evil queen. Okay, now Snow White has to run away from the evil queen. Right, and where does she go? Well, she goes out into the forest, which is the unknown, but she goes to where the dwarfs are. Now, in the Grimm's brother fairy tale, the dwarfs don't have names, so they're kind of generic. But they keep an orderly house, and they work very hard. So the Grimm brothers dwarfs, now we don't know how old these fairy tales are, by the way. There have been some folklorists who've traced some fairy tales back like 10,000 years. They're very old. Okay, so it's wisdom speaking, you could say. So Snow White goes to what? To serve the dwarves. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that to escape the evil queen,
she's got to go to men.
She has to make a pact with ordinary masculinity, right? She has to serve the dwarfs. Now, why? Because they protect her from the evil queen. Now, among primates, there is a phenomenon called fertility suppression, which is where women compete, the females compete to suppress the fertility of other females. And it's a very widespread phenomenon that's well known among primatologists and biologists, and it definitely characterizes human beings.
Absolutely.
And so the evil queen in the Snow White story is suppressing the fertility of Snow White. Now, she runs away from that and takes shelter among the ordinary men, the dwarves, let's say, who are the positive side of the patriarchy, you might say it that way. When the evil queen comes back, she shows up again, right? And she offers Snow White 3 gifts. The first is a bodice that's too tight and just about strangles her. So that's exaggeration of it's a narcissistic exaggeration of sexuality as a temptation. The second is a poisoned comb, right? Same thing in slightly different guise, right? Right, she's tempting Snow White to be poisoned by the worship of her own beauty. That's a good way of thinking about it. That's what the evil queen does. The third gift is the poisoned apple. Now, of course, that harkens back to the Genesis story. Anything you incorporate is something that changes you. It's like you incorporate knowledge. And so it's poisoned knowledge.
That's feminism.
And the dwarfs can't save her from that. And that's the situation young women are in the modern world, because the evil queen feeds them poisoned knowledge. And the deep question is why? And the real skeptic would say, well, the older, jealous, childless women are doing absolutely everything they can to destroy the fertility of young women. Now, there's a corollary to that, which is this happened to Ayaan Hirsi Ali, for example. It's often the women in these brutally patriarchal societies who enforce the worst impositions on young women. Like female genital mutilation, for example, is often a practice conducted by grandmothers.
Right.
And so that.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I got to pause the track right there because Jordan Peterson just dropped a major bomb. I think that there is a reason why you can really go on the men-centric side of the internet and see content that speaks about these different issues. Because for many of these older women that have experienced lives unfulfilled, it's almost like there's so much in their ego of their wrong decisions that they don't want to talk about how it is that they may or may not cry themselves to sleep every night because of those decisions, because of the choices that they have made, and in fact may say things in order to spoil the minds of some of these younger women. I often talk about the difference between how males and females demonstrate aggression. Males, more overt, more physical in nature, more violent in nature. Females, more covert, more behind the scenes, manipulation, lies, innuendo, reputation destruction. And you can add on to that, poisoning the well. An example of that is feminism. An illustrative example of that is that Snow White story.
And so there's a brutality in this, a brutality in the, and I think you see it taken to its logical conclusion, by the way, with this trans phenomena, because I told the bloody Senate in Canada in 2016 when they crammed through that idiot pronoun bill that was a compelled speech bill, I told them that they would produce a psychogenic epidemic among young women. Because what happens when you confuse people about something basic like their sex, you confuse the most confused the most.
Yeah.
And so, for example, a 1% increase in unemployment produces a 5% increase in psychiatric hospitalizations, because you put a little pressure on the people who are barely hanging in there and they're done. Well, if you take the swath of girls or boys, but girls are more prone to psychogenic epidemics, you take the swath of them that are confused for 15 reasons and you add 6 more reasons and they're done. And so, and we can see the full horror show that's the surgical mutilation and sterilization as the ultimate exemplar of this evil queen phenomenon. It's really dark.
Let me ask you.
Guys, I'm going to pause the content right here. They went on for at least another hour. Link to it down in the description box down below so you can go and take a look at this epic discussion, this epic back and forth between the two. Greatly appreciative of Jordan Peterson speaking to some of these issues as opposed to, going on TikTok and hearing women screaming all about this male loneliness epidemic, and they're utilizing these really surface level explanation as to the reason that they think 99.9% of the time absolutely getting it wrong. I could definitely go take a bunch of those, stitch them together and talk shit about it, but I thought that'd be a lot more valuable to go over this example in the opposite. The truth is that I think that there is a people loneliness epidemic that is, I think it's currently happening right now. And I think it's going to continue and get even worse in the future. And this is why I appreciate the one factor of the current administration seeming to push families, taking a look at certain policies and saying, is this actually beneficial for, family building going into the future? So when they look at things such as food stamps or Section 8 housing and saying, hey, listen, we're going to remove this if, you are a single parent and the child is over the age of 10, or if you've been on Section 8 for over this amount of time. I think instituting things like that, puts more of a focus on women and the choices that they're making earlier on in their life to make more correct choices, as opposed to being so liberated and thinking they have until infinity, and then they end up childless and alone. But all right, guys, let me know what you think about the content. Drop me your thoughts, questions, feelings, concerns down in the comment box down below, and then I will see you soon. Until next time, YouTube, peace.
She belongs to the street.
Girl, don't hold my hand. You a mattress actress on the OnlyFans. Get your money, girl, but damn, how is that your only plan? What you gonna do when you get too old to strip and dance? Get up out your echo chamber screaming period and yes. You a low down dirty woman if you try to get knocked up by a high value